In 2012, Brazil was gripped by the sudden disappearance of one of its wealthiest businessmen, Marcos Matsunaga. The heir to a food empire vanished on the brink of a multi-billion-dollar deal, sending shockwaves through the nation. Newspapers across the country plastered the anguished face of his widow on their front pages, while investigators scrambled for answers. At first, suspicion fell on corporate rivals. Perhaps someone wanted to sabotage the deal, maybe even eliminate Marcos to gain the upper hand. But as the investigation unfolded, a far more chilling truth came to light. What emerged wasn't a case of professional betrayal. It was a cold-blooded murder followed by a gruesome attempt to erase all traces of the crime. The details would go on to inspire multiple documentaries, each more haunting than the last. Marcos Matsunaga wasn't just another businessman. He was the CEO of Yoki, a dominant food production company in Brazil. The company had been built by his grandfather, Yoshizo Kitano, an immigrant who came across the ocean in search of a better life. It was from Yoshizo's name that the Yoki brand was born, Yo from Yoshizo and Ki from Kitano. The business began humbly as a flour milling operation in the mid-20th century, surviving through wartime and economic hardship. Over time, it flourished into an industry giant known around the world. Born into immense privilege, Marcos never knew a life of want. He didn't build the company from the ground up. He inherited it, along with the power and responsibility that came with the role of CEO. Ambitious and focused, he aimed to take the family legacy even further, dreaming of becoming the first billionaire in his lineage. And for a time, it looked like he might succeed. Colleagues described him as a savvy and capable businessman who not only preserved his family's wealth but expanded it many times over. But behind closed doors, Marcos was difficult. He was demanding, arrogant, and prone to controlling those around him. Physically, he struggled with insecurities. From childhood, he had battled obesity and poor vision, relying on thick glasses. Short and awkward, he found it hard to connect with others, especially women. He had few friends and virtually no romantic prospects in his early life. Even as he amassed wealth and status, personal relationships continued to elude him. Women were often repelled by his ego and domineering nature. Though he had everything money could buy, he failed to inspire genuine affection. And so Marcos turned to escorts. Little is publicly known about his first wife. What is clear is that their union wasn't founded on love. It was a marriage born of pressure, likely from family and necessity. Though they stayed together for several years, regret shadowed the relationship from the beginning. His wife initially tried to adapt to his temperament, holding on to the hope that mutual understanding would eventually follow. But the emotional distance only grew. Marcos was unfaithful repeatedly and unapologetically. He sought companionship online, frequenting websites where women offered paid intimacy. One of them was a young escort named Analyses, a striking blonde who caught his eye through her online profile. Marcos was instantly drawn to her beauty. She had a graceful figure and an air of mystery that captivated him. He began inviting her out regularly, sparing no expense. Her name was Analyses, and she was 6 years his junior. Her life had been a stark contrast to his. Born into poverty and raised in one of the city's most dangerous neighborhoods, Analyses had never known her father. Her mother, an alcoholic, surrounded herself with abusive men who treated Analyses with cruelty and disregard. From a young age, Analyses endured physical and emotional trauma. Beaten, harassed, and left to fend for herself in a world that offered little compassion. When she finally completed high school, she escaped that toxic environment, cutting off all contact with her family and never looking back. She trained briefly as a nurse and found work in a hospice. But caring for the dying took a toll on her emotionally. Sensitive and empathetic, Analyses grew attached to her patients, and each death felt like a personal loss. It soon became clear this was not the life she wanted. She longed for a future with more opportunity, more control. Determined to reinvent herself, Analyses set her sights on a career in law. She studied hard and passed the entrance exams, but the tuition was far beyond her reach. With no family support and barely scraping by on her nursing salary, she faced a difficult choice. That's when she turned to escorting. Analyses used her looks and charisma to create a profile on a high-end escort site. With the help of others in the business, she curated an eye-catching online presence, and soon wealthy men began seeking her out. The income was substantial, enough to support herself and fund her education. But she always saw it as temporary. Once she earned her degree and started her legal career, she intended to leave that world behind. It was during this period that she met Marcos Matsunaga. What began as a business arrangement quickly turned into something more. Marcos became one of her regular clients. He showered her with gifts and attention, seemingly unconcerned about being seen in public with her. Analyses knew he was married, but never imagined he would leave his wife for her. Yet that's exactly what happened. After 6 months, Marcos decided he didn't just want Analyses in his life. He wanted her by his side permanently. Without hesitation, he filed for divorce and began introducing Analyses as his fiancée. The truth of how they met and Analyses' past was something he kept closely guarded. Together, they crafted a more socially acceptable origin story. A chance meeting in a cafe. It was the version they told everyone, even Marcos's inner circle. Still, Analyses' entry into the Matsunaga family was met with skepticism. Marcos's parents suspected her charm was a calculated tool, a way to capture the affection of a man who was rich, powerful, and not conventionally attractive. They believed she was playing a role, pretending not to notice his flaws, his arrogance, his volatile temper. But Marcos was undeterred. He planned an extravagant wedding, complete with a white gown, hundreds of guests, and a towering cake. Afterward, he moved his new bride into his sprawling mansion, where Analyses took her place as the lady of the house. Marcos had a passion for collecting. His obsessions were rare wines and antique weapons. A massive underground cellar housed his wine collection, meticulously organized by vintage and region. For his weapons, he had a secret room, a private armory, where firearms and bladed weapons lined the walls, each piece a symbol of his wealth and peculiar interests. Marcos took immense pride in his collections. His prized wine cellar and private weapons room were only the beginning. The rest of his home was a showcase of opulence, filled wall to wall with antiques, luxury furnishings, and expensive pieces of modern art. Though the decor bordered on garish, it reflected the businessman's insatiable appetite for wealth and display. Not long after their wedding, Marcos and Analyses decided they were ready to start a family. But despite months of trying, Analyses struggled to conceive naturally. Eventually, the couple turned to in vitro fertilization. Even then, success didn't come easily. It took time, patience, and emotional strain. But finally, their daughter was born. The joy was overwhelming. The child was a miracle, long awaited and deeply cherished. They devoted themselves to her upbringing. She was raised in luxury, surrounded by love and doted on by both parents. As she grew older, the family began to travel the globe, exposing her to cultures and traditions far beyond their homeland. To the outside world, they looked like a picture-perfect family, wealthy, happy, complete. But beneath that carefully constructed image, there were darker, stranger pursuits. Marcos had always been an avid hunter. His obsession with killing large game dated back years, and he tried to share it with his past partners to little success. Most women in his life had been repulsed by the blood sport, but Analyses was different. Some believe she took up the hobby not out of genuine interest, but as a calculated move to deepen her bond with Marcos and secure her place in his life. They started at shooting ranges. Analyses learned how to handle firearms, rifles, pistols, shotguns. Before long, she was accompanying Marcos on real hunts. They tracked and killed wild animals together. Analyses showed no hesitation. For her, it became a challenge, a way to prove herself. She treated the act of killing as a game of dominance. Either you take the shot or you don't. Marcos was enthralled by her enthusiasm. He loved watching her handle her weapons, stalk her prey, and claim the kill. He taught her how to butcher the animals. Boars, deer, anything they brought down in the woods. Together, they skinned and dismembered the carcasses with sharp knives, cleavers, and axes. It became a shared ritual, intimate in its own violent way. Their home was devoid of typical pets. Instead of cats or dogs, they kept venomous snakes, another of Marcos's fascinations. Elaborate terrariums were custom-built to recreate their natural habitats. It was a lifelong dream for Marcos, one he hadn't fulfilled in his first marriage due to his ex-wife's refusal. But with Elize, everything seemed possible. She embraced, even encouraged, his strangest passions. By the spring of 2012, Marcos was on the cusp of the most important deal of his life. He was preparing to sell the family company, Yoki, for a staggering sum. The move would not only make him a billionaire but allow him to reinvest in new ventures that promised even greater wealth. Negotiations were intense and constant. Marcos was rarely at home. His days were packed with meetings, calls, and strategy sessions. He became consumed by the process. To be closer to his work, he and Elize moved into a luxury apartment in an elite high-rise in the city's financial district. It was sleek, modern, and conveniently located near the company headquarters. But while Marcos buried himself in business, Elize was left alone, isolated in the lavish apartment with its sweeping skyline views. His schedule was unforgiving. He often slept at the office, telling Elize he was just a few days away from finalizing everything. Once the deal closed, he promised their lives would change forever. Then, on May 19, 2012, just one day before the billion-dollar deal, Marcos Matsunaga vanished. He disappeared without a trace. Elize didn't report his absence until the following day. She told police that she hadn't been alarmed at first. According to her, Marcos had scheduled an evening meeting and told her it might run late. He had packed a few things and mentioned that he might spend the night at the office, then head straight to a morning meeting. But when he failed to return the next day and stopped answering his phone, Elize said she began to worry. That's when she contacted the authorities and reported her husband missing. The moment investigators began digging into Marcos Matsunaga's disappearance, alarm bells rang. He hadn't shown up for his evening meeting, nor did he appear for a critical morning negotiation, the very one tied to the billion-dollar deal that had consumed his every waking hour. It was unthinkable. Marcos simply wouldn't miss that meeting. The idea that he had vanished willingly was immediately ruled out. The first theory that emerged was chilling yet plausible: kidnapping. Given his wealth and prominence, it seemed likely someone had abducted him, and that ransom demands would soon follow. But as the hours ticked by, no messages came. A full day passed. Then two. Still nothing. Hope that Marcos was alive began to wither. The silence was deafening. Detectives wasted no time. They launched a broad inquiry, questioning family members, friends, and business associates, seeking out anyone who might harbor a grudge or stand to benefit from Marcos's disappearance. Yet, despite their efforts, no clear suspect emerged. Marcos had always run his affairs with precision and care. His decisions were strategic, his moves calculated. His success had brought wealth not only to himself, but to those around him. There was no apparent motive for murder, at least not from the world of business. Then, several days later, Elize visited her in-laws. Holding her daughter in her arms, she arrived in tears. What she was about to reveal hadn't yet been told to the police. With a trembling voice, she told Marcos's parents that he had been unfaithful, again. The woman he was involved with, Elize claimed, was named Natasha Villalima. She said Marcos hadn't bothered to hide the affair, even after explosive arguments and her threats to divorce him. He had promised to end things with Natasha, claiming he wanted to keep their family together. But in truth, he had only become more discreet, continuing the affair behind a veil of secrecy. Elize had known something was wrong, so she hired a private investigator. The evidence she uncovered was damning: photos and videos showing Marcos with Natasha, laughing and holding hands at the very same restaurants and venues he used to frequent with Elize. It was a slap in the face. He wasn't just cheating, he was flaunting it. Worse still, Natasha had a familiar past. Like Elize, she had once worked as an escort. Marcos had met her on the same website where he had found Elize years before. Their affair had lasted 5 months. During that time, he gifted Natasha an expensive car and paid her a significant sum to delete her online profile. He was all in, just as he once had been with Elize. Analyses claimed she confronted her husband the day before he vanished. She showed him the evidence, every photo, every video. She expected a fight or at least an apology. But Marcos didn't offer excuses. Instead, he calmly packed a bag, told her he was leaving, and walked out the door. According to her, he never came back. Based on this account, the narrative shifted. Perhaps Marcos hadn't been kidnapped. Maybe he had run off with his mistress. But to those who truly knew him, this theory didn't hold. Marcos would never abandon his empire, certainly not on the brink of the biggest business move of his life. It simply wasn't in his nature. And then, everything changed. Roughly a week after he vanished, a passerby walking through a remote area some 50 kilometers from Marcos's residence made a horrifying discovery. Garbage bags, torn and scattered along the roadside. Inside them were human remains. Police responded immediately. Forensic examination confirmed the worst. The body belonged to Marcos Matsunaga. He had been executed, shot in the head, and then his body had been meticulously dismembered. Each limb, each section of his torso had been carefully separated. The killer hadn't acted out of blind rage. This was methodical, precise. The cuts were clean, exact, made at the joints with a level of anatomical knowledge that shocked even seasoned professionals. Pathologists reached a chilling conclusion. Whoever had done this wasn't just violent, they were trained. The killer was either a surgeon, a butcher, or someone with extensive experience using carving tools. The investigation had no time to lose. Without a clear suspect, detectives decided to return to the last known location where Marcos was seen alive. The upscale high-rise apartment he shared with Analyses. And from there, the pieces of the puzzle would begin to fall into place. The luxury apartment where Marcos Matsunaga lived with his wife and young daughter was outfitted with a sophisticated surveillance system. Investigators immediately turned to the building's security footage, combing through hours of video. One recording showed Marcos heading down in the elevator the night of his disappearance to retrieve a food delivery. He returned moments later, carrying pizza boxes in his arms. That was the last time anyone saw him alive. What followed was silence. No further images of him leaving the apartment that night, the next morning, or ever again. It was as if he had vanished into thin air inside his own home. But the next morning, something else appeared on the footage. Analyses. She was seen struggling to move 3 large rolling suitcases out of the apartment. The bags were heavy. So heavy, in fact, that she could barely maneuver them. Investigators had little doubt what she was transporting. That same day, Analyses Matsunaga was arrested. Brought in for questioning, she clung to her original story. She insisted her husband had left her to be with another woman. But when police showed her the elevator footage, Marcos entering the apartment and never coming out, her resolve broke. Tears streamed down her face. Then she began to talk. She claimed their marriage had been dead for some time. Marcos, she said, was no longer the man she had fallen in love with. He humiliated her, reminded her constantly of her past in escort work, and told her she was unfit to raise their child. According to Analyses, he controlled every part of her life, isolated her, and stripped her of independence. She told police that when she once brought up divorce, Marcos laughed, saying he'd take their daughter and leave her with nothing. That night, Analyses said, she confronted him with photos provided by a private investigator. Images of Marcos with his new mistress, Natasha Villa Lima. But instead of apologizing, he flew into a rage and struck her. What happened next, she claimed, was a blur. She remembered grabbing a gun. She remembered pulling the trigger. The next thing she knew, her husband was dead. Realizing what she had done, she decided to cover it up. Using the same knives and cleavers they once used together on hunting trips, she dismembered his body and packed it into bags, all while their daughter slept in the next room. Analyses' story raised immediate doubts. Investigators soon discovered a disturbing inconsistency. The photos and videos she claimed to have shown Marcos the night of the killing weren't delivered to her until May 20th, after his death. In fact, she had taken those very materials to his parents, claiming that Marcos had left her for Natasha. But now it was clear he was already dead by then. Natasha Villa Lima was eventually located and testified in court. She told a different story. According to her, Marcos was afraid of his wife. He had confided in her, telling her Elias was unstable, capable of violence. The last time she saw him, just one day before he vanished, Marcos told her he planned to move to Florida after the sale of the company. He intended to start fresh, build a new business, and leave Elias behind. Divorce was inevitable, he said. He just had to get through the deal first. Then came a horrifying revelation from the forensic team. Blood was found in Marcos's lungs, meaning he was still alive, still breathing when his head was severed. He had not died instantly. Elias denied this, insisting the gunshot killed him immediately. But the trajectory of the bullet told a different story. It entered his skull at a downward angle, suggesting he was sitting or lying down, relaxed, unguarded. He hadn't seen it coming. He hadn't even tried to defend himself. Her claims of self-defense began to crumble. Witness after witness testified that Marcos, while a difficult man with a sharp tongue, had never been violent. He could be arrogant, even cruel with his words, but he never raised a hand to anyone. There were no signs of physical abuse, no record of domestic violence. Many believed Elias fabricated the story of the slap to justify her actions, knowing full well that the only person who could dispute it was dead. In the end, the court rejected her version of events. Elias Matsunaga was found guilty of premeditated murder, committed with exceptional cruelty, and of attempting to hide the crime. She was sentenced to 20 years in prison, a punishment that many in Brazil considered shockingly lenient, given the brutality of the act. Her daughter, now orphaned by violence, is being raised by Marcos's parents. And the country, still haunted by the details, remembers the case as one of the most chilling crimes in modern Brazilian history.